Hi everyone, this is Vina. Today on Rework, we're bringing you a conversation with Toby Higbie and Victor Narro. Toby is the director of the Institute for Research on Labor and Employment, or IRLE for short, and Victor's a project director at the UCLA Labor Center. Toby and Victor talk about the significance of May Day in Los Angeles and how it brings together diverse coalitions to engage in a powerful act of collective resistance. They also share some really helpful tips on how to make a career in social justice work sustainable. Thanks for listening.
Welcome, everybody. My name's Toby Higbie. I'm the director of the UCLA Institute for Research on Labor and Employment, and I'm a professor of history and labor studies here at UCLA. I'm joined today by Victor Narro, who's the project director at the UCLA Labor Center and faculty in the Labor Studies program. Victor's a veteran of many May Day marches here in Los Angeles. He has formerly worked with the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights Los Angeles, CHIRLA, and before that was also the worked for the regional office of the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. So we're really excited to talk about May Day, International Workers' Day, which is coming up this next Thursday, May 1st, and the gathering will begin around 9 a.m. in downtown Los Angeles. And we're talking about the connections between labor and immigrant communities and how people organize for social change here in LA and across the nation and the world. So welcome, Victor. It's great to be with you as always. I'm wondering, what comes to mind for you when you think about May Day?
Well, I think it's that moment of the entire year where, we just not celebrate the contributions and and celebrate the working class, but it's the time for us to come together, all the movements of social justice, immigrant rights, labor, criminal justice, environmental, housing, organizations of all, we all come together as one on the streets. And it's the presence of the entire movement coming together. Organizations also displaying themselves, their members, their banners, their colors. I just think that it brings the humanity of social justice work together in the street, and we we work together a lot of many different campaigns, but we're often siloed. Either you work on the housing issues, you work on criminal justice, environmental, labor, immigrant rights. But this is the moment where we come together as one movement, one powerful movement, and it's a beautiful. I call it like the display of humanity in the streets of social justice.
Absolutely. One of the things I think about with May Day is just, as you say, all the different banners, different groups marching together. Sometimes they've got, wearing the same T-shirts. They've got similar signs, and the, banners often, very different messages of the particular campaign issues that particular groups: immigrant rights, tenants' rights, unions, etc., worker justice. But as you say, all marching together peacefully in the streets. It's really is kind of it's like a celebration, a parade as much as a march, I would say.
And we carry out strong messages. Like it's a celebration of us coming together with powerful messages, united messages, and it's we because we're under attack, and every May Day there's powerful messages. One thing you can always count on in social justice work is we're always under attack, and today we're under a major attack by this president. It's being very harmful to the entire landscape of social justice work, especially immigration and labor. But he's attacking environmentalists. He's attacking criminal justice. He's attacking everyone. So that's one thing we got in common. it's uniting us this year that we're all under attack. And I think May Day is a powerful force to send a strong message out there that we're resistant, we're fighting back.
And we'll get to a little bit later, talk about the particular, challenges today in the political and policy climate. But I was wondering if how did you first get involved in organizing May Day? You mentioned that you've been doing this since 2000, so 25 years. And, what was it like here in LA when you arrived, and the kind of work you were doing around that time that folks decided to launch that renewal of the May Day event in 2000?
Yeah, so back in 2000, I was the Workers' Rights Project Director for CHILA, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. It's become statewide now and nationally, so they took out the Los Angeles part of it. But back then, it was the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles, and a lot of my work focused on the day labor organizing movement, like great organizers like Pablo Alvarado, who's today the executive director of the National Day Labor Organizing Network. The late Tony Bernabe, who was the organizing director for Chile, who we lost on COVID, during the COVID crisis. He was one of the major organizers too back then of day laborers. We have a great group, Myron Baez, who now works at ACE. Was one of the organizers, and it was a great team of organizers. And we also partnered with the Institute of Popular Education of Southern California. We worked jointly with them to organize day laborers. We were also organizing domestic workers. But then also, my first entry into prior to Chile, when I was at MALDEF, they connected me with the Koreatown Immigrant Workers Alliance. It was the first worker center I really started working with back in 1992, and I tried to continue that relationship with them. And then the Filipino Worker Center was launched in 1998. It was a small staff. Today it's a big worker center, but I started realizing like May Day could be a chance to highlight worker struggles in Los Angeles. And there was a major struggle. Kiwa was involved in a major struggle with, I think it was 11 to 12 workers working at an Elephant Snack restaurant. They were all wages, and they were exploited, and they were fired for complaining. And so I thought this would be a great moment to connect it with the theme of International Workers' Day, of, connected struggle. And so, we all got together, the Filipino Worker Center, IDEPSCA, Iwa, and Chila to create, use May Day to highlight the struggles at Elephant Snack. So I think that's, May Day has always been happening in Los Angeles, always been, activities, but this is my entry into the May Day work, which, this coalition later led to the creation of the Multi-Ethnic Immigrant Workers Organizing Network, because we decided to keep this coalition going because it was so powerful. Worker struggles from different sectors, and then Me1 would take on then May Day marches. We'll sponsor it in coordination with other coalitions. The Justice for Janitors strike was happening at this time, or it just ended. The big strike, the J4J strike. So they joined us, so we did have union support. They did join. And Mariana Durazo, she was leading a Unite HOA Local 11. She reached out to, during the 1990s, she also reached out to Chila and other groups to try to form connections and partnership. So she, her organizers and members joined us as well. So it's a powerful display. It was, around 800 of us, 600 to 800, but it was a powerful event. We couldn't get back then, the permit process, it's not like today. We had to fight with the police to get even the flatbed truck, to park the station itself in front of Elephant's Neck on, I believe it was on I think it was on Olympic Boulevard. And then they couldn't give us access to the street. So we have protesters on one side of the street, protesters on the other side of the street. Because back then, it was very tough to get cooperation by LAPD and city departments. That changed because a few months after that May Day 2000 event, we had the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles. And through the National Lawyers Guild of Los Angeles, great lawyers like Howard Sobel, Cynthia Anderson Barker, and others, they pushed hard in the city to change the whole permit process because there were so many groups that want to do a lot of marches and protests during DNC. And I think that effort helped, change the landscape of special events permits, getting permits for marches. So we do owe them because today it was, we're able to get these permits and everything based on the work that the NRGLA did during the Democratic National Convention. But our first day May Day march, we didn't have the benefit of that. So we did the best we could. We pushed it as much as we can without getting arrested by LAPD for, blocking the streets. But that's, then afterwards, it started the trajectory. Me One became one of the major anchor groups. The Government Worker Center was, formed in 2001, so they joined Me One. So Me One became the anchor group for the next few years of May Day events and activities.
So that moment in the spring of 2000 was pretty momentous because, as you say, the Justice for Janitors, SEIU Local 1877 had just gone on this big strike. And also, I think then shortly after, if I'm not mistaken, there was a big immigrant rights rally. And in the winter, then a couple of months earlier, the AFL-CIO had changed their policy around work employer sanctions and kind of organizing.
That happened because Miguel Contreras' leadership. Miguel Contreras in 1990. So there was the alignment of all this stuff. Miguel Contreras becomes the first person of color to lead the LA labor movement, the LA Federation of Labor in 1995. And his, as you know, his agenda was to inclusiveness, to bring in immigrants into the labor movement, to change the political landscape, but to reach out to immigrant rights groups. And I think that led to the, that in the combination with the AFL-CIO convention was in 1999. There was a big debate on the floor, and the AFL-CIO changed its position on immigration reform. It led then to the Executive Council decision in 2005, the AFL, and in 2000, in February 2000, the AFL-CIO decision to change its position on immigration reform.
So how and that had a big impact on the organizing landscape in Los Angeles in terms of,
I think so.
Or was the national, would you say like the national AFL was kind of behind the eight ball and the change had already happened?
The stuff that was happening in Los Angeles, especially the AFL-CIO convention held in Los Angeles, the way groups in Los Angeles and unions mobilized around that convention, I think it created a momentum then for the national level for the AFL-CIO to change its position.
And how do you think that impacted organizing moving forward then in those early 2000 years?
I just think it's one of the benchmarks. I think the AFL-CIO Executive Council decision on changing its policy around immigration reform was a combination of all these interconnectedness that was happening in Los Angeles and throughout other cities, but Los Angeles is always seen as one of the major factors with bring about that decision. And I just think that moment when the AFL-CIO changed its position, it creates that stronger connection between immigrant rights and labor. It was historic, and I think a lot of my students weren't born there, so I keep telling them how historic this was. Miguel Contreras, I'm grateful we wrote a book at the Labor Center about Miguel Contreras because, we got to make sure we don't forget that it wasn't always like, we should never take for granted how we have this strong connection between labor community, especially with the issue of immigrant rights. It's something that many fought hard bring about.
So what do you think that's a great point about like the change. It was fought over. It was a great victory. And also that, most people who are coming up in the movement today or our students, they don't, they weren't around back then. I mean, what would you say is the big difference then to have an environment where you're not, where labor and community organizations are in closer alignment? Well, how does that change the organizing environment for us today, and what kind of opportunities does it give us?
Yeah, it makes it a more powerful movement, especially on the issue of immigrant rights, because immigrant workers were really transforming the labor movement in many different industries because of, the process of migration, the patterns of migration, the restructuring of a lot of these industries. It really created the integration of immigrant workers. And the Justice for Janitors, one of and United Trade Local 11 are the two examples I always use, at how immigrant workers have transformed those unions but also those industries. And they've all been led by immigrant workers, many of them undocumented workers. So, they defied and the what was the perception up until that time that you couldn't organize immigrant workers or undocumented workers. And but we've shown in many different ways that the immigrant workers have been transformational when you think in terms of labor and economic justice. The worker centers, they're mostly, the work that back then the Kiwa was doing with restaurant workers and grocery workers, mostly immigrants from Korean and Latino immigrants. But then there was also the day labor organizing. There was the organizing then with the janitors, local, United Trade Local 11. I think it shows that the landscape of economic justice really we owe a lot to the courage of immigrant workers to organize and fight back.
So when you arrived in LA, then it wasn't like that in terms of the landscape of organizing.
Yeah,
It
I
was
just sense there
more.
was a disconnection. There was there were leaders within the labor movement that were trying to change the framework of organizing and the move the labor movement more to a better place of inclusion. Marilena Durazo, Dave Sickler with when he created the California Immigrant Workers Association to help process the amnesty application for the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act. There were some connections with, Chula, when Chula was born in 1986, with folks from the labor movement, but it wasn't as, I think the emergence of Miguel Contreras as the head of the LA County Federation of Labor was really controversial. I mean, there was a lot of opposition to him. He transformed the labor movement from an all-white leadership that was focused more on business, business as usual, and he helped transform it to a powerful, stakeholder, not just in politics, but really brought together the beginning of the process of inclusion. I remember in 1992, like I couldn't go when I came to LA in 1992. I couldn't go to the LA County Federation of Labor building and just walk in and say, like I could today and say hi to everyone, engage with. I had to make an appointment just to walk into that space. It was just a
Fascinating.
disconnect. Yeah, but today, so I can walk in there today and know everybody and just have a welcoming. So he made it welcoming. He created labor terms of welcoming space for immigrant communities, and I think one of his first campaign was like the Home Care Workers Union that got them into like which is today SEIU 2015, but organized a union with home care workers, and you saw like Latino workers, API workers, Black workers together. Like it was a great campaign, and I just think but I think that May Day today reflects a lot of the outcomes of those struggles of really trying to connect the labor movement with community and immigrant rights and other social justice work. So it's a very intersectional movement today, but I always tell my students it wasn't always like that, we should know the history of the struggle it took to get to that place.
It's interesting how, unions and themselves are like internally, they're their own kind of coalitions of different workplaces and skills, etc. And there's always a certain amount of internal negotiation that goes on and all of that. And I'm reflecting to myself, I'm a historian, so I'm thinking, May Day, of course, goes back a long way and is associated with the 8-hour movement, the movement to establish the 8-hour day in the late 19th century, when, the labor movement was heavily dominated by immigrant workers. And, May Day was a tradition that was associated with immigrant workers and fell out of fashion, as it were, in the Cold War, when it was seen as being, there was a certain anti-militancy across the board. But it's interesting, change of leadership, change of members. It takes some time for that to develop. You're describing it over the course of the 1980s and 90s, and I wonder if you could reflect on, like, as May Day has evolved here in these last 25 years that you've known it, are there any particular highlights that you can think of and changes that, developments over time that you can, call attention to and celebrate or dissect?
Yeah, I mean, one of the major ones, there's a key highlights, like May Day uh, 2001, um, you know, no, it was May Day 2002, came right after 9/11, because 9/11, was in 2001, and then May Day, we were trying to figure out, should we have, because there was surveillance, right, national security, there was a Patriot Act, there was a fear of, the Muslim community and other communities were targeted by the government. Really, it made it legal for federal government officials and agencies to target specific communities. There was the outcome of 9/11, and should we have a march? Should we have a march where people turn out? We had we started the march, the Olympic and Broadway. We had around 20,000, 15 to 20,000 came to march. That's a big deal back then. And so it was important to have, that was significant because it showed that people now, in the post 9/11 landscape, we still need to take the streets and fight back. That I thought that was very powerful. There's so many.
That must have been scary, though, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
there was a lot of government, observation. Yeah.
I mean, there was either a Lakers game going on. We didn't think there was so many people, so it took forever to get the march started, and it went all the way to the Staples Center. There was a Laker game. But I was like, we just were impressed. We were just overwhelmed with how many people turned out. Then there's 2006. 2006 was the spring of mega mobilizing happening. It started with March 25th, 2006, where, close to 1 million people took to the streets of Los Angeles. We followed Chicago, where we had a huge mobilization. But back then it was the Sensenbrenner bill, HR 4437. That's the bill that passed the House of Representatives in December of 2005. The bill would have made it a crime, a felony, to be undocumented in this country. And it would have made it a crime for those of us that provide support to undocumented immigrants. And people got fed up. I think there was, that's all this, a good friend, Chris Sabatamayan, has written a book about this, but there's all these reasons of the mega mobilization. But I think it was, people got fed up. Immigrants in this country got fed up. They contribute so much, they work so much, they contribute so much to the economy, and to be called a felon, I just think it created this anger that translated itself into the streets of, showing a powerful force to push back on this bill. And it it accomplished it because the Senate Judiciary Committee, after the March 25th march, decided not to take on the bill. So the bill stopped. It never made it to the Senate. But that March 25th, 2006, then created this, I think, the spring of mega marches, and then it translated into the major mobilizations on May Day, where not just Los Angeles but throughout the country, the biggest marches ever took place on. I think it's estimated 5 to 6 million throughout the whole country took to the streets. Here in Los Angeles, we had two main marches, and in the morning. In downtown LA, we had close to 500,000 people. In the afternoon, we had a march too that came down Wilshire Boulevard. They started at the Labor Center, so yeah, I was the lead organizer for the march. So it was stressful because we had a downtown Labor Center was being used and everything, but I had to finally call the beginning of the march because there was just too many people, and we were, there was front loading because too many people hit the streets. We had like another 500,000 that afternoon, and made our way to, I think it was Wilshire La Brea for a big event, with the Cardinal and Reverend Lawson was one of the speakers. But it was, I think it was the biggest May Day march, one of the biggest ever in Los Angeles. And many of the labor movement worked together with Me One and other community groups. It really showed how we've been coming together as a large movement. And then the following year, I think it's very significant to me for many reasons, but it was that march that ended at MacArthur Park, started on Wilshire and Third and Vermont and Vermont Avenue and Third, and we were the afternoon march. They had a bigger march in the morning. We were the march that the LAPD Police Commission, they gave us a permit. We were kind of like the troublemakers because we didn't want to join the morning march. We went through the whole thing. So we were always stigmatized, and I think that had a lot to do with the police major crackdown. They call it the May Day melee, where riot police just came down hard. They shut down the program, came down hard on the protesters. Many people got injured. There was one case of a woman who suffered a miscarriage. Families, everybody fled. Our downtown labor center was used as a space for the activists. So they were trying to flee the LAPD, and then we closed the building. We shut down our entrance. We have families and activists. LAPD won't be allowed to get in. So I confronted the police outside of a building. I got 4 misdemeanor tickets for being, the bogus tickets for, basically because I didn't want them to go into the downtown labor center space. So they detained me for like an hour and just gave me my 4 tickets. I had to dismiss the tickets, but there was there was a negative part of this history of May Day March, but it's also highlights the awareness that we should never take things for granted. We always have to be diligent. When we do our street marches and everything, we have to also protect ourselves and make sure that we are, have things in place to deal with these kind of issues that can happen. And but there was a major lawsuit by the National Lawyers Guild. The city had to pay a lot of money, but one of the outcomes of the lawsuit too was it will require every law enforcement and LAPD to undergo First Amendment training and trainings on the rights of protesters. I think we need to go back to those because I think that was 20 years ago. A lot of those officers have probably retired. I think we need to go back and do those kind of trainings. Because recent activities, recent major marches, we've seen very aggressive law enforcement. So we need to, we saw there's a lot in the George Floyd protests during the pandemic, all the major protests. There was always a lot of major aggressiveness and confrontation by the police. So I think the police or LAPD needs to undergo these First Amendment trainings again because 2006, I think a lot of police officers have retired, and so we need the new wave of law enforcement to undergo trainings and so they'll know what the rights of protesters are, what and they will respect our constitutional rights. But that was a very, you know, um, powerful moment that always sticks with me. I got hit with the rubber bullet. It's very painful. The rubber bullet can kill people, and I got hit with one in the back, and I was sore for a long time. And, but we learned a lot from that. But then we have had other great moments. In 2009 was the first May Day after the Obama administration after President Obama took over at the White House. We had a human billboard. So we pulled it off. We started at Echo Park. I didn't think we could pull it off. We bought a company from Florida to train us. And this company does human billboards at different sporting events, at the Super Bowl and other sporting events. So we were like, why not do something creative? We pulled it off. So right there on Weather Street, we had the street blocked off. And at the right moment, 2000, we gave out the signs. We had chalked up the spaces. We had 2,000 people just with the sign, with the billboard, and when we gave the green light, they flashed it up, and the helicopter captured it. It said "Workers First." And there's a powerful image. So we were able to pull it off, and I think other people don't know about that human billboard Mayday. But it was, the thing I want to emphasize is it's a lot of us working together, and everybody has a role and responsibility. It's not one group. And the thing that's been very powerful for me is like the last 2 or 3 years, I stopped doing the legal observing or coordinating legal observers. I stopped doing the logistics. It's in the hands of great organizers and advocates from Chilla, the LA County Fed, others that carry on the work now. And it's a continuation, right? I feel better because one is I'm too old to be doing that work, but now I can feel like I can focus on my own, peers, our students at Labor Center, Labor Studies program, the IRLE, all of us to work together to do our own logistics. I feel relieved I no longer have to be involved with the overall logistics, but it's in great hands. People step up, and it's a good indicator of transformation, how it happens. It's not just transformation externally, but internally, like we just step back and people carry on the work. And I feel, and then I think in many respects, because I've been watching the folks at Chula and the LA Fed for this May Day, and then last year, I think they do the work much better than I did in many respects. So they've taken it up a major level. So I think they actually do a lot better work. They've gotten a lot better at it than when I was doing some of the logistics. So
I think you probably did a pretty good job, Victor. Yeah. But one of the things that makes me think of is, often I think in American culture, there's not a lot of emphasis on collective action, in popular culture, and we don't learn about it necessarily in the movies. But there's a sense that these things happen spontaneously. People are angry, so they show up on the street to protest, and that's how social change happens. Actually, what you're describing is, the way it really happens, is that people get organized, and it takes a lot of different people doing different tasks. I mean, I'm just listening to you talk about dealing with the police or legal observers or different types of things. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about just, what is the work? Like, this is a lot of work. So what's the labor that goes into making a social movement, and how can we, lift that up more effectively?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work, special events permit, LAPD, but then that triggers the other departments, right? Because DOT, Department of Transportation, the street closures is a major. They're figuring out the street closures, negotiating the street closures, because street closures have an impact on the transportation of buses and other transport, and it also impacts the freeway if it's too close to the freeway entrance and exit. That's requires a lot of negotiations. There's a lot of good people at the table constantly trying to figure out the negotiation. The courts of the city, city that's working closely with the council members and city officials, because there's a course of the city, but then we have the right to march and we have the right to protest. So I also want to also highlight, like, I'm talking about one May Day activity that happens regularly every year, but there are groups like there's an afternoon march next week. There are organizations that take their own approach, and their own approach is like, with their own approaches, they do it more from an advanced perspective of, we have the right to march and we just make the announcement and people have to work with them, city officials. And I think we also support those organizations, and we want to make sure the LAPD respects their rights. And there's a lot of great groups like Union and Barrio and others to do their own May Day marches. I try to join them as well because I do have there are great organizers there, but they take a different approach. Right? They just want to claim the streets, and because it's our right to march in the streets. And so we always try to have like legal observers with them, send legal observers there, try to support them as well, try to highlight what they're doing. So there's an afternoon march beginning in MacArthur Park next week as well. So I'm trying to promote, because May Day should be about activities happening throughout Los Angeles. And we have the right to participate in any of the activities. And we have the right to really claim our space in that part of the city, our streets, for a May Day activity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And all these marches, these events, they're all, ways to measure the strength of organizations, their turnout, tests and things like that. What are people turning out for this year in particular, Victor? Is there an official theme or a set of themes, or what would you think most of the big issues folks are highlighting?
We're not on the themes of we're all united, one movement in solidarity. That's the theme. I'm trying to figure out because I was gonna look at the flyer, but there's a theme, but it's the concept of we're all united. It's one movement. We're all united. Workers are all united in solidarity. But then what the great thing about you had a central theme, but then it branches out into sub themes. And this is where you then look at the different issues that people are focusing on, whether it be criminal justice, immigrant rights, um, you know, labor, because we're all under attack. There's also the Palestinian struggle. That's another theme. We try to be as inclusive of all the other different themes under this one central united theme, which is what's been happening in the last few years. And I think that's a way to ensure inclusion of all the different movements, on all the different issues people are addressing. So there's the big general themes that unites us together, but then there's also the sub themes. And every organization also promotes their own, there's a template, like you're not required to use the same flyer. You can adapt it to your own organization, to your own membership, and you can translate it. And so it's done in a way that it's inclusive of all the different organizations, what issues they're focusing on, and what makes sense for their membership for them to focus on. But then we all come together under one major event.
Yeah, that's great. It is always an exciting event. I've been going to these May Day marches for many years, 15 years or so. And it's always fun to see all the different groups and to be there at the beginning of the march, waiting in anticipation, and everyone's eager to get going. And then once, marching together down the street.
Joy. It's we're always too angry. I always say we're too angry, and for good reasons. I mean, but anger, uncertainty, fear is always the dominant emotions in social justice work. But this is a chance for us to also be joyful. Like we come together to be joyful that for one day we can celebrate also one another and the joy of the major show of solidarity that we have. it's a powerful message, and I think it's good to be joyful, right? This is a chance for us to be joyful in the fact that we're doing this work and we're trying to, we got some powerful work that we're doing, powerful. It's a joy of showing the power of the movements coming together.
Absolutely. Well, as we sort of move to a conclusion and on that theme of joy and celebration, Victor, I mean, any thoughts? Now you've been doing this work for 30 years or so or more. What does it take to have a career in social justice? And especially for our students and young people out there who are contemplating some challenging times, uh, you know, words of wisdom for making a life uh, when your work is struggle and social change.
I think, I just think the best thing I can share to address, on that topic is um, y- always be in community, right? A lot of the work today is done with coalition. Don't do it by yourself. Always be in community, because when you're doing the community, then the community can uplift one another. Be in community, but also deep in solidarity. I think sometimes we do a lot of policy, a lot of different organizing campaigns, a lot of campaign work. We sometimes tend to focus too much on the deliverables, the outcomes. But there's a journey to every outcome. There's a journey. It's the journey of us working together, deepening the relationships. There's a humanity in every task, in every activity. Next week, there's a lot of work being done, maybe the logistics and everything. But when we come together, um, deepen the awareness, that feeling of that humanity coming together. Look at the relationship within every activity and task, and because the journey, like the relationship building, how we uplift one another, sometimes that's as important as the outcome, because we really have no control over the outcomes. And we just shouldn't pretend we can control the outcomes. We can do our best for the outcomes, but what we could control is the way we connect, where we show that the relationship, the community we build, because then we take that with us, and that's the best way, I think, to that's the best way of burnout prevention in social justice work, because it's very demanding work, as you know, many hours, endless nights, weekends. But as long as we feel we're in a space of community and we can help one another, and I think that helps overcome the feeling of loneliness and burnout when you become overwhelmed.
Absolutely. Words of wisdom, Victor. Thank you. So, May Day is coming up and it's going to take place in downtown Los Angeles. People are gathering at 9 a.m. in the morning on May 1st at Olympic and Figueroa. And the program's going to start around 10 a.m. and the march sometime after 10:30 or so. That sound right, Victor?
Yeah, and I encourage people just to come and be part of this major joyful celebration, but also this effort to send the powerful message of resistance to this administration, but to other institutions that are often causing harm to the communities that we try to help and uplift. Yeah.
All right. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking about going, don't go. Please come on your own, but even better, call 5 friends. Go. Always bring a crowd, and there'll be lots of people there to meet you and enjoy the day together. Victor Narro of the UCLA Labor Center, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, your wisdom. It's always a joy to talk to you and to work with you. And thanks to all of you out there, and join us again for another conversation about labor studies in Los Angeles. Bye-bye.